Thank you for coming along. Welcome. Hopefully I will not compare too badly to the keynote. It's difficult to go on after them, at least I'm not in that big room. Okay, so I guess coming at this, the subject of DeFi in probably a very different way to most of the other speakers who are going to be talking very specifically about individual products. I'm coming at it, I guess, from a collision of categories, really. So the title is Collateralizing Players, Why Gaming Will Be DeFi's Breakout Audience. But I guess we are all, to some degree, quants in the room. We've all read Nate Silver. So if we're making predictions, we should have a probability gate around that. So 51% is what I think is going to happen. So who am I? My name's John Jordan. I've been in the game space now for 20 years, done various different things. About 15 years ago, I was involved in this company called Steel Media, which is still going, which is very heavily involved in mobile games and the rise of mobile games. It runs websites and conferences, and I launched blockchaingamer.biz, obviously a website about blockchain games, about a year and a half ago, editor-at-large there. I have my own consulting company, Accidental Gizmo, so I consult with a few blockchain games companies and do a lot of presenting around blockchain games. And since May this year, I've joined DappRadar, and I'm Director of Communications there. So a bit about DappRadar. DappRadar is based in Lithuania. Obviously, as the name suggests, very focused on the Dapp ecosystem. So all categories of dApps, games, DeFi, gambling, all that sort of stuff. And we're the leading global platform for analysing dApps and discovering dApps. So obviously, things being on the blockchain, data is kind of open. I forgot my stopwatch. Let's try that. So we look at the dApps that are running on various blockchains. We cover 7 blockchains at the moment, with more to come over the coming months. And we're just looking at the kind of active wallets. We're looking at the transactions, looking at the kind of flows of tokens through those wallets, and then creating kind of ranking systems. And obviously, as part of that, as the dApp ecosystem deepens, we think we've got a big part to play in discovery. And we're not the only ones who think that. So last week we announced a funding round, so $2.3 million in a seed round. Interesting, we had Naspers Ventures, so one of the biggest internet media companies in the world. Their venture arm invested, that was the lead. And also blockchain.com, its new venture arm, also invested. So pretty happy to have that support. But on with the talk. So I'm breaking the talk down into 3 parts. I'm guessing everyone knows quite a lot about blockchain, so I'm not going to spoon-feed you that stuff. I guess most of us know roughly about DeFi. I'm not really going to go into that. That's not really my area of expertise. I thought I would spend a bit of time on games, the games market, where we are with that and what's going on in the games market. Perhaps that's something that people will be less familiar with. And it kind of provides a foundation for why blockchain and games might become like a useful synergy. And then we'll go into, at the end, kind of the early stages of where we are in the industry in terms of games and DeFi and what's going on there. But start with the games industry. So some numbers, always like numbers. So we have, this is for 2018, so $135 billion of global revenue in the game space, at least one estimate. So obviously fairly substantial annual sales, and this is obviously all retail consumers spending money in games, buying games, and then that flowing through to developers and publishers mainly. Industry splits into 3 main kind of formats. So we have mobile here, which is come from a very low base and grown very quickly to now be about half the industry. We have PC, which is kind of always there, tends not to grow very fast, but is there about a quarter. And then we have console, which tends to go up and down. Console tends to be on a 5-yearly cycle as Sony and Nintendo and Microsoft release their consoles. So we're kind of coming to the end of the current PlayStation 4, Xbox One cycle. So actually 2018 was pretty good for consoles, but now we're going into decline and we're waiting for the next ones to come up. And we can see kind of what's been going on for the last 5 years to kind of get an idea of where these big numbers have come from. So this is data from another companies, so App Annie and ICD. And what they've done is they've indexed the value of these categories at 100 in 2014. They've actually broken out handheld games as a separate entity, but that's basically non-existent now. And obviously what we can see here is 2014, PC and mobile were the same, and now PC's gone up a little bit, but mobile's almost tripled. So the game space is pretty big, but all the growth is coming from mobile. Obviously, that's part of a wider move of people around the world getting mobile devices. Obviously, everyone can play games on them. And actually, a bit more deeply than that, the rise of mobile games has really come with what we call free-to-play games. So probably you've all played mobile games. And the point of these games now is that you download them for free. You can play them to some extent, and then normally there's some sort of gating system involved, or some sort of payment system if you want to kind of progress faster or get kind of rarer items or more powerful characters. So the interesting thing is this is where this growth has come from. It's been global, and it's been from this free-to-play model, which is very different to what we've had certainly in the console world, which has very much been about spending $50-$60 buying a game and playing it. PC has always had a bit of free-to-play in it, particularly out of Korea and China, where the free-to-play model was an anti-piracy device. So there is some free-to-play in PC, but basically it's mobile is where we've had this free-to-play model. And world growth always continues, at least that's what the analysts say. So here we have 2019, they're up to $150 billion, and the main point is that mobile is where it's all coming from. So compound growth there, 27% on mobile. Okay, so let's dig in a bit more and think kind of how this money is, why people are paying for this money, and how that money is kind of being, or what's being bought with that money. So I guess people have played Candy Crush Saga, or know people who played Candy Crush Saga. So it's an interesting game. It was originally a PC game, pretty simple. It came to mobile, and with the addition of kind of social interactions, it became this massive hit. Actually came out in 2015. It's still the top-grossing game in the US at the moment. So these games, we've kind of moved from a scenario where you play through games. Games have endings. You know, the free-to-play model is what we call games as a service. These things never die, and they can sustain massive audiences for very long periods of time. And we can see here, you know, this is the most expensive in-app purchase, £150. So this is not kind of small amounts. We can see you can spend small amounts. You can spend £2, but you know, this stuff is not being highlighted. This is where the action is. And actually, when analysis has happened of who's spending in free-to-play games, what you find is, you know, 97, 98, maybe even 99% of the audience of a very big game like Candy Crush won't spend any money at all in their entire life. So they're playing these games very much for free. They're playing, trying to match the candies in Candy Crush Saga. They run out of lives. They use up their lives. They either have to spend money to buy more lives, or they wait, or they spam their friends. So these games typically have some sort of gating system involved, often around time or energy. And people pay to kind of speed up that process and become more powerful in the games. And so actually here, if you buy the Luscious bundle, the best value, if you want to spend $150, you get in-game currency, gold, which you can use for buying various different things. You have items, booster items. You have 24 hours of infinite lives, so you never run out of lives, and some more time boosters as well. So what's interesting is this model's been very successful. It's driving all these kind of tens of billions of dollars of revenue, but for most of us, most of the people in the world, you know, they are never going to be spending $150 worth of currency buying this sort of stuff. So what we've seen is, even within the very small percentage of people who spend money in games, really a lot of the money is being spent from a very small percentage of the spenders. So you're having a very kind of whale-based model. So whales, as in the kind of gambling scenario, very small numbers spending lots of money. There is some changes going on here. So this is from Fortnite. I guess people have heard of Fortnite, the biggest game over the last kind of couple of years. So $2 billion of revenue last year. Again, has a very similar storefront to people spending $150 to buy these bucks, V-Bucks, and this is the most V-Bucks for your bucks. That makes sense. But Fortnite is a bit different. It shows something different to what we've seen in some of the mobile games. For one thing, it is a console, PC, and mobile game, so it's cross-platform. You can play Fortnite through any of those devices, and it's all kind of in the same space. You're not kind of separated off. And what they have is this idea of seasons. So you can see here, this is season 5. This is very old now, but the season ends in 74 days. So this is like time-limited content. And together with kind of Fortnite's incredible social kind of glue, it's a kind of a social game you play with 4 other people. And combined with that and this kind of time-limited kind of payment system, so this outfit, the Huntress, is only going to be available for 74 days. After that point, it's gone. Obviously, not talking about blockchain. Once these things are taken off the central server, you don't have them anymore. So this has been very successful at getting people to, you can play the game to earn some of these things, or you can just spend your V-Bucks to earn them. But once these are gone, these are gone. But what's interesting about this is these are all cosmetic, so you don't gain any advantage by having the Huntress in the game. So this is all purely about the look of your character in the game. You have these animations as well. So it's a different sort of monetization, very successful, and it shows that the games industry is not just kind of stuck in one form of business model. Of course, we do kind of have these problems, particularly for these very big games like Fortnite, where people at whatever level believe that they own the things they have in the game. So we have lots of, certainly in the games industry, lots of talk about scams around Fortnite accounts being for sale. So obviously in the legal documents around Fortnite, you do not own anything. It's all on a centralized server. If Epic, for whatever reason, want to ban your account, you have very little recourse to that. But obviously people who are playing Fortnite and people who are spending money in Fortnite believe to some degree they own their stuff. And so you can obviously go and sell your account, but then you're giving away your username and password to someone on a forum, and you can't really guarantee you're getting your money back. And when it obviously you get scammed, people get very upset. So that sort of stuff's going on, and that's kind of a product of success, I suppose. And also the free-to-play model, which often revolves around things called loot boxes. So loot boxes are things you buy in the game. You don't know what's quite in there. They're random items. You know the rarity. You know the drop rates of each rarity of item. Some people, well, now most legislations, governments in the world are looking at this in terms of gambling legislation. So this stuff is not illegal, but obviously it depends partly on countries and how well they've created their gambling legislation to whether this stuff could be seen as gambling. Obviously, because there's no legal way of getting your assets out of a game for real money, it doesn't have that kind of that cash out scenario that most gambling has. But in some jurisdictions, so the Netherlands has looked at some games and said they are gambling, and Belgium as well has done that. So what we're seeing now for even some of the big publishers, the EAs and the Segas, they're either not releasing their games in the Netherlands and Belgium, or they're taking out this kind of monetization aspect. So you may say Netherlands and Belgium are not obviously the biggest territories in the world, but it's interesting that everyone's looking at it. I mean, in Japan, we've had legislation about under 16-year-olds and how much they can spend, and China is obviously, well, not obviously, but China is legislating pretty much everything about games at the moment, in whether they can be released and how much time people can spend playing them. So there's lots of stuff going on around legislation and games. So that was probably more detail than you wanted, but I think it's good to show where the game space is. So the game space is very successful at the moment. It's never been bigger, really, and never been more successful. Lots of money being spent, and mainly on digital currencies and items. So that's a change. There are issues around retailing, and kind of bubbling under the surface, I would say there are issues around ownership and the kind of a disconnect between what the players think they own and what they actually own. You can probably see where that one's leading. Okay, so the case for blockchain in games, why this might be interesting. So a kind of almost like philosophical point that I thought I would make at this stage, because it is something that I am hearing in the blockchain game space. So we have this idea of blockchain games, or games using the blockchain, and this is to some degree, I guess all technology has this, and certainly blockchain seems to be quite open to having big philosophical arguments about kind of what's going on. And this is, to a degree, could be seen as kind of equivalent to Bitcoin, and is it a store of value or is it a payment system? But blockchain games, we can consider our games where all the game logic, everything runs on the blockchain. So obviously that could be quite restrictive depending on what blockchain you're using. But even on something, there's some games that run on EOS, which is obviously a fairly fast blockchain. There's still a lot of friction if you're running all your game logic on a blockchain, having to kind of sign those transactions, even if you're not paying gas. But obviously from a purist point of view, this is kind of the pure way of doing it. All that kind of stuff's very open. And I guess in the DeFi space, we look at the success of something like MakerDAO, where it's come up with this idea of a stable coin that is kind of a programmatic stable coin, and then people are building on top of that. So you have this idea of games or any product being a foundation because it's using open standards, and anyone else can build on top of it. So a good example, I'll talk about this game a lot, CryptoKitties, which I guess people have heard of. People own CryptoKitties? Hands in the air? A few. Okay, so probably the lowest level you can have and call something a game. CryptoKitties was kind of famous for highlighting the ERC 721 standard, the non-fungible token standard on Ethereum. And you can do very little in CryptoKitties, but everything runs on the Ethereum blockchain and is open. And lots of developers have built games on top of CryptoKitties in the sense that you can now play racing games or fighting games using your CryptoKitties. They're not very good games, no one does it, but you can do it. So this is kind of course this split. So we have people more from the traditional game space saying, well, we've tried to make games on Ethereum, it's really limited, can't really do it. we want to make games, and the kind of call is games first, blockchain kind of second. So we're kind of seeing most of the activity now at the moment in the game space is games that have a centralized system. So the game logic generally runs on a centralized system. The login, you may not need a blockchain wallet. That all happens centrally, and then there's some element of the game, normally item ownership, is on the blockchain. This is obviously better for usability, and this is what's happening at the moment. But potentially, I think down the road, if we're looking at games and DeFi kind of combining together, we may end up with some problems around that. So I just highlight that point now. Okay, so remember, this was Fortnite. This was our season kind of a business model. And very quickly, this is kind of obvious, but just so we have it in our heads. So this is how the business model works currently in games. So we have a games company, Epic Games, makes some stuff in Fortnite, and then we have some players. And player one gives Epic some money, and player two gives Epic some money, and obviously, if you want to have access to that, you give Epic some money. So for this kind of model, it's very vertical. What they're trying to do is have as many players as possible. Obviously, they need to create good content to attract those players, but once that's kind of up and running, you're basically spending marketing money to get as many players as possible, because that's, every time you add a player, you can charge them for it. I mean, that's going back to the kind of the cost of building this is the cost of creating that in the factory is nothing when you have these extra players. And obviously, what happens is that other content goes away, another season comes in, or some more content is created. So we have this one now is the new thing, and player one, player two. So we're doubling up the money on each of them. So that model really makes sense, and that's where the game space has been. It's kind of a bit of a winner takes all, because once you've got a massive player base like in Fortnite, then as long as you can retain them, you can keep pumping out this stuff at very low cost. So this is why Epic made $2.4 billion last year. Now, blockchain games, when we think about it, are very, very different. It looks similar to begin with. So we have player one, we have a CryptoKitty, and he's going to buy a CryptoKitty from DappRadar, who have minted this CryptoKitty. But then what's going to happen is player two is going to buy the CryptoKitty off player one. So there may be some small residual money going to DappRadar, who make CryptoKitties, but the basic interaction, the basic flow of money is between the players. Obviously, player three then buys it off player two, so the money is kind of sitting here. So we have a very different sort of model. It's not really a vertical model, it's a horizontal model, where what we're looking at in blockchain games is for these items to be tradable for very long periods of time. So you're basically looking, obviously they make some money here on the initial sale, but it's kind of this residual model where they're really going to make money in the long term. Now, compared to Fortnite, obviously I've tried to scale the size of the dollars there, much smaller. Unless you're having kind of hundreds of transactions, which could happen. But it's a very different sort of model. And I think it's taken game developers quite a long time to get their heads around that. And we could think about some other examples of this. So longevity and the Rolling Stones. So whether they thought they would be doing this in their 70s, who knows? But owning the publishing rights from the Rolling Stones records would be a pretty profitable thing to do. Obviously, the Rolling Stones sold a lot of records as well, so maybe not the best model. And maybe a better example is these guys. Anyone know who that is? No one knows? No one knows. Well, times have changed. So the Pixies, archetypal 90s. 80s, 90s kind of art rockers from Boston. So these guys, you don't know who they are, you know the Rolling Stones are. But blockchain games, I see them as a bit more like being something like the Pixies, who have a very relatively small community around them, but very, very into what the Pixies are doing. Very hardcore fan base. And I think this is where blockchain games, certainly for the next kind of 5 years, are going to be going. Not going to be these massive audiences. So when people talk about blockchain games not having these massive DAU numbers, so I think CryptoKitties at the moment has about probably 200 DAUs. The biggest blockchain game probably has about 3,000 DAUs. So not nothing, but not a million DAUs, or not whatever, probably 10 million DAUs from Candy Crush. And so this is the kind of model that I think we're looking at. Okay, let's go into a bit more detail about what's going on in terms of items, which is kind of where the intersection between games and DeFi happens, I think. So this is CryptoKitties. This is the CryptoKitty that was minted when 1 million CryptoKitties had been bred. So CryptoKitties is interesting in the sense that you buy a CryptoKitty and then you can breed it with anyone else's, or you can have obviously your own ones and breed them, and you just create another one. and the look of the CryptoKitty is just based on the DNA that's embedded in those CryptoKitties. So very, very simple. The way the game works actually is there is a centralized or off-chain. You have this kind of special artwork. So most of these ones are called fancy cats, and these are a bit like Fortnite actually, available on a limited time process. And if you can kind of breed the right characteristics to create some of these, then if you do it in the right time, then you get one of these kind of fancy cats. So it's all about breeding. The problem that happens is if you're like me and I don't own that many, I own about 30. Occasionally I get excited about breeding a trait and I try and do it and then realise it gets quite expensive. You end up with lots of CryptoKitties. Now I love them all in their own ways. I've given them all names. But to most of you, and even to me, they're kind of a bit meaningless. You don't really know. Most of these you can't tell which are the most valuable. I mean, you might think some of them are funny. In fact, this one here, Chop Top, that is the most valuable of those. So the only way you know that is if you look down the bottom here, he's a Gen 0. So there are only 50,000 Gen 0s ever minted. So that was about $50 when I bought that one. And all these other ones are just ones that I've kind of bred to try and breed out a specific trait, and now I just got them left in my wallet. So there are 1.7 million CryptoKitties now. So it's this kind of really interesting kind of a system where, unlike the 21 million Bitcoins that will at one point be minted, effectively it's infinite the amount of CryptoKitties that can be created. So you've ended up with this game where effectively you have an endless supply, but there's no idea of working out what the value of most of these ones are, unless they have this kind of specific, almost kind of centralized attribute that will give them value. It's almost impossible to value those ones, which we'll come on to actually in a minute, a way of solving that problem. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the dApps, the game dApps that show activity and have some idea about trying to create value around them. So in this point of the speech, I'm kind of looking at these kind of NFTs and can we kind of think of them in some ways as having some sort of inherent value. So this is from a marketplace called OpenSea. So it is a Ethereum marketplace for any NFTs, any ERC-721 tokens. So the biggest category, or the number one in terms of volume, is something called Decentraland. So Decentraland is interesting. It's not so much a game, it is a user-generated kind of environment, a bit like Second Life, if people remember Second Life. Has pretty strong community, it's been around for a number of years, and it has this idea of land. So we're seeing this particularly in blockchain games at the moment, this idea of land as a token. Now I guess that kind of plays in psychologically to kind of when we think about owning land and property. Obviously it's a bit different in a digital space, but in Decentraland there's an idea of working out the value of land based on where it is in the world. So there's some locations have high value items from the developer on them, and if you're closer to those, the idea is they're worth more. That doesn't really concern us. I guess we're trying to get an idea of how big a market this is. So I've just kind of filled these in dollar values. I guess that makes a bit more sense to most of us than ETH at the moment. So $77,000 in 7-day volume. I mean, not enormous, not nothing. Equally market cap. OpenSea work out their market cap in a slightly odd way, which I wouldn't necessarily agree with, but it's a kind of rough idea of the value. So basically that's the average price over the last 7 days times by the number of assets. So some nominal $200 million. So the average price of this land selling in Decentraland is 5 ETH. So fairly substantial, 3,200 or so owners and 93,000 assets. CryptoKitties, so almost 2 years old now, but still going. I'm still placed number 3. So much smaller volume. That's really because the average price of these is much lower. So a tenth of an ETH there. Market cap, again, pretty small. That's partly because you have 1.7 million of these very low value items. What's interesting here is owners, so there's almost 80,000 owners of CryptoKitty NFTs. Unfortunately, that's because CryptoKitties was launched at the end of 2017 when all the crypto prices bubbled, and everyone just bought them as investments. So the vast majority of these 80,000 have not done anything with those CryptoKitties. So it's probably less than 30% who have actually done anything with them. So they're just sitting in wallets. My crypto hero. So this is when we're getting into a bit more of I guess, what we might call a traditional game. Pretty interesting project out of Japan and pretty much all Japanese audience. Very, very grindy. If you're interested in this kind of area at all, it's very much worth checking out. It will take you about a month to work out what's going on. They could hardly have made a more confusing game if they tried. Partly because they're Japanese, so it's partly a cultural thing there. The other interesting thing is, as I was talking about before, blockchain games and games on the blockchain is, they have a very open, free-to-play element to it, which is all centralized. So it's actually really hard to get onto the blockchain elements of My Crypto Heroes. But what's interesting is, despite being not many owners, so we have just over 2,000, almost 2,200 people who have NFTs in this game. The volume's pretty big. So I don't know if they just had a good week there. Depending on the events going on in the game, that might boost that. But $92,000 worth. Market cap's pretty small, but there's not many items, so you can't breed them or anything like that. They're minted by the developer, so there's 37,000 there. The average price is pretty good. It's 0.6 of an ETH. So I think with games like this, there's not many of them. So My Crypto Heroes has, as I say, about between 2,000 and 3,000 DAUs, pretty sustained over the last kind of few months. So it has a kind of a core base, a bit like kind of the Pixies fan base, you would say. But we've kind of seen the average price of this is actually not bad, certainly compared to CryptoKitties. And we can go and look in a bit more detail about this is the sales history. This is from another website called nonfungible.com, where they look at all the kind of all the activity on NFTs. So this is Decentraland, what we were talking about before, and this selling land. You probably can't see it at the back. I realise these slides are quite small now. So this is 4 land items being sold. This is 20 land items being sold. And we can see this parcel of 20 land NFTs sold for $42,000. So not many transactions though. 12 transactions in a week. They have their own ERC20 token called Mana, so that's what is used as a payment system. But the average price was $5,800. So it's kind of interesting in terms of it's not really it's a different sort of NFT in the sense that it's land. You can build things on it, but it doesn't really have use in the way you would have in a game system. And probably that's why the value is higher, and they have a very strong community. And these land sales have done pretty well. But we can kind of start to see, I guess, that if you owned land, what the value of it might be. Now, depending on where it is, you can't really see on these maps, but this little mini-map is showing you kind of where the land is in relation to other things in the world. We can start to have an idea of kind of value. And there's been some interesting articles written about speculating on the land sales in Decentraland on Medium and those kind of things. So there's been a bit of kind of work done on that. This is My Crypto Heroes. So just these NFTs are quite small, little kind of pixelated kind of characters. Again, so the number of transactions is actually a lot more. So 350 transactions in a week compared to 12 for Decentraland. And the average price is $168, which doesn't seem like much. But these are now kind of purely being traded on their usefulness to someone in the game. So I think we're starting to get a better idea of like a fundamental value of what an NFT might be in a game. I guess we used to use the term utility for that to some degree. But the prices for these ones are like $70, $50, $56. So to me, that's actually pretty interesting. Okay, often. Yep, you can.
Sorry, could you please use the microphone for camera record?
Say again?
Yeah.
Oh, for the question, yes.
Thank you.
So I was curious about those stats,
Yeah.
and if in these volumes there are also like fake volumes, because this happens in other environment, and I was curious, given the volume are not that much, if there are like some movement that can be like flagged as a fake, in your opinion, obviously.
So, so yes, fake volumes are something actually at DappRadar we look at quite seriously and spend a lot of time looking at things like bots and manipulated data. In the terms of NFT marketplace sales, it'd be hard to see why anyone, unless someone had owned a lot of the asset and wanted to buy a lot of the asset to drive the price up and somehow dump it. It's a bit different to tokens because they're NFTs, so that in some way they're unique. So I'm sure people would think about ways of doing it. I think it's much less obvious and there's much less liquidity than, say, like an ERC20 token that you could dump on a market. So if I was trying to make money that way, in the blockchain space, I probably wouldn't use NFTs.
That could be maybe for marketing reasons.
Yes, look, yeah.
I want to have volume in order to be on the top of DappRadar, let's say.
That could be the case. Yeah. I've not heard anything about that. Although saying that, so coming on to the next section, so looking at often when we talk about NFTs or when the games industry talks about NFTs, it's not looking at these what we might call mundane items that are useful in games. It's talking about these much more kind of prestigious items. So I spent a bit of time looking at some of the very high value NFTs. And actually why their price is actually not particularly useful, I don't think, at the moment. So this is from a game called Crypto Space Commander, which is currently doing a pre-sale. They've got a license from Star Trek, obviously, and they're doing an auction. It's actually ongoing for the next few weeks. So this was the first item they sold, obviously the original USS Enterprise. It sold for 84 ETH, so at the time that was $15,000. So obviously got press around that. Interestingly, they've just sold another one. Just found out this morning. So this one just sold today. So this is the Picard Enterprise, and this is actually sold for double. So this is 170 ETH or $30,000. So obviously these are very high value items. There are kind of lots of press around them. You can kind of see why these might be quite valuable. Interestingly, these guys did a Dutch auction, so they actually had the price at 200,000, then it dropped, rather than an English auction where you bid it up. So I guess that gives you a slightly better idea of value to some degree. But it's kind of interesting. I mean, there certainly is a place for these high value items, but the value of this is not particularly going to be generated by what's going on in the game. And if we look at the most valuable NFTs that have ever been sold, they all have slightly kind of weird provenance, really. So this is a card from a card trading game called Gods Unchained. This is Hyperon. It's sold for 146 ETH. So these are all in ETH prices. Obviously, the dollar price changes depending on when the sale happened. So that was part of their pre-sale. They sold about $6 million worth of cards in 2018, so it was a slightly different kind of era going on there. If people want my slide deck, if you find me on LinkedIn, the slide deck's there, by the way. We have this one, Celestial Cyber Dimension. This is a very special crypto kitty that was actually created for a charity auction, sold for 103 ETH. There's actually a digital crypto kitty and a physical kind of art piece as well. Actually, it was bought by like a blockchain insider guy, so it's the guy behind the POA blockchain bought that. It's a charity auction, so obviously he's buying that for charity. It's not necessarily, it's not really a game kind of NFT in the sense that could we think about collateralizing that? Well, is anyone else going to buy at that level? Probably not. So this is why I'm suggesting these are probably not a good kind of basis for value. This one, 146 ETH. This is a racing car from a Formula 1 game called F1 Delta Time that's coming out next year. So they did 3 auctions of these special kind of one-off racing cars, and this one, what was interesting, this was a typical auction system where people were bidding up, and actually there were 3 or 4 people bidding at quite a high level, at about 400 ETH. There were multiple people bidding for that car, but they did 2 other NFT auctions after that, and they both went for about 100 ETH. So we could see here this was probably driven up by the kind of excitement of the auction. And this is the kind of, in a sense, maybe the saddest one. I don't know. This is the most expensive NFT ever sold. This is a crypto kitty called Dragon. And talking about kind of trying to find value for crypto kitties, no one has any idea why this crypto kitty is valuable. It has no interesting attributes at all. And if we go in, this is the wallet of the person who owns it. So here they have Dragon, and Dragon is for sale for 600 ETH. So there's obviously, going back to your manipulation point, maybe they thought they would buy it and then someone would buy it off them to, this would be a interesting use of blockchain where you could drive up the price, because who would want to own the most expensive NFT ever? What's funny about this is you won't be able to read this here, but this one here, because you can name your CryptoKitties, this one is called Was 600 a Mistake? so I don't know if the wallet owner has called that one, or they've seen that and bought that or something, but this suggests that this was probably not a legitimate kind of valuation of that CryptoKitty. Okay, so trying to kind of come back to thinking about why blockchain and games I think will come together. I think it as everything in blockchain takes longer to be consumer facing than we perhaps hope. But we've seen the games industry is very big. People are spending lots of money. Some of them think they have ownership of items that they don't have. Even in the blockchain space at the moment, we do have emerging ideas of valuation and trading economies. But the fundamental thing is really about people who play games, which is pretty much everyone these days. They really love games. It's a very large proportion of their leisure time, of their disposable income, and they want a bigger stake in their games. And if nothing else, blockchain items give them this idea of ownership. It doesn't necessarily have to be about financial value, but obviously it could be. And this guy, John Linden, pretty well known in the space, he worked at Activision. He ran kind of Call of Duty, one of the biggest games in the world. He worked for, he did a big mobile game with with Marvel. He also worked with the Pokemon Go team. So he's worked on some of the biggest games ever. He set up Mythical Games last year, raised $16 million to do blockchain games. This is some characters from their first game. We can see this is obviously very much focused around NFTs and being cool and kind of owning this sort of stuff. This is called Blankos Block Party, coming out, I think, some point this year. Okay, so the case for blockchain games, I think we're very early stages in everything in blockchain, but I would argue some games have a sustained player base, which I'm more interested about the sustained player base than necessarily the numbers. And I think we have solid NFT trading going on to give us some idea of value, which I think is kind of what we need to interact with the DeFi system. So synergies with DeFi. There have been a few, not really at scale yet, I guess, as you'd expect. So this first one was kind of interesting, going back to Decentraland. So when Decentraland started their land sale, this is November 2018, there was an idea that maybe some people wouldn't have enough of the mana currency in order to buy these land portions. So they did a deal. So Decentraland are based out of Argentina, and these guys, Rip.io, also based out of Argentina. And they did a deal around mortgages. So if you didn't have enough mana to buy a land parcel, you could set up a mortgage, and an individual would buy the land for you. You'd set up, obviously using a smart contract. You have to put a deposit down, then have to pay off the mortgage, and then you'd get your land. If you defaulted, obviously the person would keep the deposit and the money you paid and the land. Didn't really work out. There wasn't really a lot of volume. I think mainly because the people who are interested in Decentraland have been in blockchain for a long time, and none of them need a mortgage. So a nice product, but not really focusing on what users wanted. This is the most fascinating one, for me at least. This is wrapped kitties. So CryptoKitties ERC721 token, all unique. Wrapped kitties will turn that into an ERC20 token. So effectively you're going from a non-fungible token to a fungible token. Like many things with blockchain, when I heard about it, I was kind of like, sounds cool, why would anyone want to do it? But there was some logic to it. Interestingly, as far as I know, this has nothing to do with the CryptoKitty developers. This is just someone who has kind of thought this is cool. So you can take I could take some of my CryptoKitties, in fact I have, that have no value really. I don't know what to do with them, and I could turn them into ERC20 token. Now what can I do with that? Probably can't read this, a bit dark, but this is Uniswap. I guess people heard of Uniswap. So you just kind of swapping items. So I can take my WCK ERC20 token, and I can turn it to ETH or anything else that's supported on this. That's kind of useful, but not particularly interesting, I don't think. This is on OpenSea, that marketplace we spoke about before. So these are CryptoKitties that you can buy using wrapped kitty tokens. So I'm not sure anyone's going to spend 10,000 of them for this one. I mean, that is actually a high value CryptoKitty. But you could kind of maybe imagine, I mean, gas fees being what they are at the moment, maybe not right now, but maybe someone could spend 500, they could turn 500 CryptoKitties into wrapped CryptoKitties and then buy this poison orchid one. So that kind of makes a bit of logical sense that you're taking a low value item, transferring it into something that you can buy a high value item from. That kind of makes sense. What's actually, I think, the most interesting kind of, I don't know if this was a thought through byproduct of what these guys were doing, or whether it's just kind of something that's happened. But this is the CryptoKitties website, and this is, I'm searching for the cheapest CryptoKitties I can find. So the cheapest one here is, I'll do it in dollars, is 23 cents. And this one's 25 cents. So we can see here, there's some idea of pricing. Now, how does that pricing come about? Well, there's an obvious link here. So wrapped CryptoKitty tokens are 20 cents or 21 cents. So we can kind of see now that if the price of wrapped CryptoKitties went up, then people will be buying the cheapest CryptoKitties as arbitrage, and then, depending on gas fees, turn them into wrapped CryptoKitties. So what's interesting here is, I think, without any kind of, not top down, it's bottom up, we've kind of come into some idea of at least working out the bottom pricing for a CryptoKitty, because we now have a mechanic where we can turn it into something else and then use that to arbitrage. So that's pretty cool. I guess that's what blockchain is kind of all about, and I think it gives us a start of some ideas about how this would work in DeFi.
John,
Yes.
question. Can you wrap them back?
Yes.
Excuse me, can we use...
Sorry, yeah.
Can you wrap them back?
Yes, I think you can wrap them back. I've not actually done it yet.
Unwrap.
Yeah. So I can't be 100% sure on that. But yeah. What's gonna go? Okay. Wrapping up. MakerDAO, I'm sure we mentioned a lot in the conference. MakerDAO is actually quite active in the game space. Recently did a promotion with this game, Axie Infinity, which, again, if you're interested in blockchain games, that's one to check out. They're very much kind of come out of the CryptoKitty kind of fan club, but wanted to have a bit more sophisticated game, and they're very open and very keen on kind of building kind of blockchain elements into their game. So this was more a promotional thing. So if you did a CDP, you could get a rare Axie. But what was kind of interesting is off the back of this. So this guy, the Jihu, is Jeff from Axie Infinity. Very much worth following on Twitter. He's very interesting, very intelligent, and he came up with the Jihu DAO. So this is a manual, centralized system. And I can never tell with him if it's a joke or whether he's serious about it. But anyway, he basically said to people in the Axie Infinity community, if you want to send me your mystics, so the mystics are the most rare Axie that you can have, if you send that to me, I will collateralize it. Basically, I'll put it in my wallet and I'll send you some ETH. So not enormous. I think about 15 people did it. I think he got more than that in the end, but he got about 20 ETH at one point. And that 23 mystics was 1.7% of the total supply of that particular Axie, which I guess, again, was kind of mirroring the often kind of a said thing that MakerDAO has about 1.7% of all Ether locked up in it. But I kind of think we're seeing with blockchain that this sort of thing is probably a bit of a insider joke at the moment, but we can kind of imagine when game developers really start thinking about this stuff, that will get interesting. And this is, to some degree, it's kind of a community DeFi. So synergies with DeFi, we're very early. I would say we're in kind of this first penguins stage, which we often use, certainly in the game space, where all the penguins are sitting on the ice floe. They want to jump in the ice, but there's a sea leopard beneath, and they're just waiting to see who's going to jump first. Did he get eaten? Okay, it's safe for all going. So we're definitely very, very early stages. Sorry, horrible text there, but I do kind of think, I did want to kind of stress this, I do kind of think one thing we will have with games, and I'm not so bothered. I think originally when I started doing this talk, I was much more about, there's millions of gamers out there that are spending lots of money in games. I think obviously that's what we expect, in a decade's time. But I think what's interesting now is we're starting to see, maybe not high volume now, but we're starting to see volume trading of a certain level. These items are kind of non-speculative in a way that ERC20 tokens are a bit more speculative. And I do think this means games will give us kind of a way of robustly modeling value fairly soon. So will you be able to create a CDP using CryptoKitty? Well, I think that just kind of makes sense. I mean, I think I would be amazed if that doesn't happen. I guess what I'm a bit more interested about in terms of future, not that I don't like my Coinbase card. I have my Coinbase card. I use it a lot. But I think when we have this sort of thing going on here, where DeFi is allowing gamers to have these assets in their games, have their things like Mario, that be properly valued, and then using that in some sort of kind of open world finance. That's really, I think, the vision of where we're going, although we're very early. So that's it. I think we've got maybe a few minutes for questions. There's my email on Twitter. I'm there. So yeah, thanks.
So if the game publishers are making a lot of money by creating new games and you have to sell new skins,
Yep.
why would a DApp developer, why would anyone create a game where the items are, you don't reset every time there's a new platform, right? What's the motivation of creating those kind of games? Because you don't maximize revenues in that sense.
Well, so this is the big issue. This is actually what I've found is the games industry is actually fairly negative towards blockchain, if not antagonistic. And that's partly because the model it is built on is just so different. At the moment, the game companies own everything, and they take all the money. So why would you give up control? That will happen, I think, to a degree with legislation. And I think it will happen to a degree when you start having some of these blockchain games start to kind of build out big communities, and item ownership starts to become something that's mentioned a lot more. So at the moment, in Fortnite, people may assume they own things, but they don't. So they might try and sell them, might get scammed. In blockchain games, when you start to see this kind of trading of NFTs and people saying, well, I bought this for $100 and sold it for $150, then there'll be demand from users to go, well, I want that in my normal game. So I think it will take time, and the game developers definitely didn't. It's a bit like maybe traditional finance. You know, they definitely don't want to be unseated from their position of power, because at the moment they're doing very well. So I agree.
Just about to say exactly what you said, John. See the big guys in the gaming space as the big banks, the Merrill Lynch and so on. They enjoy their place. They want to continue selling every one of us these items, but we don't own them. But now there are lots of small and mid-sized startups that are understanding this, and they are coming and knocking at their doors. So they are starting to disrupt this field. And it's going to take some time, but disruption is going to be happening.
Anyone else? There's one there.
Thank you for the presentation. I was wondering if you would have any data on what, basically where these users store their NFTs. Is it fair to assume that they use Meta, or that the majority uses MetaMask, or is there any other wallets out there that are more focused on NFTs, on the use cases, and yeah, also considering the value of some of these?
I've not seen any official kind of data or anything. I would imagine for the majority of those games, you access them with MetaMask. So that, I guess, is where the majority of that kind of stuff is being held. There are a few of the wallet companies who are kind of promoting themselves on that side. I guess generally in the Dapp space, you kind of see, wallets are kind of trying to differentiate themselves by moving away from just being kind of wallets to being have some discovery mechanism in there. I don't think really kind of fits their business model. So I don't think we don't really see that in any big form yet. I've not heard of anyone putting their, I've not seen Ledger saying buy Ledger to keep your cryptokitties yet. I just don't think that there's so few of these items that have that sort of value. So not think like a 1 Bitcoin level. We're not really there yet. But I think it will happen. Yeah,
There are a few, like Argenta does,
Are they? Okay.
and also I think Manager.io does the same. You can see your collectible items.
Oh, you can see them, but I guess it's kind of, do you take your items out of MetaMask where you're using them? Because the thing with game items is if you want to use them, you want to have them in a wallet where where the game can interact with them. If you're putting them in cold storage, then you can't use them in the game. So I think that would be very much for the high end kind of value.
Yeah, thanks, John. Very interesting. So far, for me, the whole NFT space is still kind of collecting rather than actual playing or gaming with it.
Yeah.
Do you think we'll see a change towards more active multiplayer games, maybe even with Cheese Wizards, the second game from Dapper?
Yeah, I did buy Cheese Wizards. I have no idea what that game's about. I'm really confused by it. I think at the moment, partly, I think the ERC 721 token is a bit limiting in this case. So there is, I'm not that technical, but there is the ERC 1155, which is where you can kind of combine non-fungible and fungible tokens. So to some degree, you could have like your character, and then you could have armor as individual kind of tokens that go on that. So I guess that kind of makes it a bit more kind of gamey. But I slightly disagree. I mean, I kind of think with my Crypto Heroes, if you want to play that game properly, you do have to go and buy some NFTs to play it. So it's not they don't have any value at all. I just think at the moment the games are just so limited in the kind of gameplay that they offer that we haven't really got to that level yet. But that's kind of, so say with the free-to-play mobile space, it took game designers for about 5 years to understand how you made interesting games. And I think obviously it'd be the same with blockchain. I think we're done then. Thank you very much.